My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, and for 7 years my life was a sequence of keycard swipes, retinal scans, and lead-lined doors. I wasn't studying little green men. I was a materials scientist for a black-budget project deep inside the Groom Lake complex. They called it Project Axiom. We called it the Sandbox. Our job was to reverse engineer the substrate of a material recovered from a certain incident in the 1940s. A fabric that wasn't fabric, a metal that wasn't metal. It reacted to thought, faintly, like a phantom limb. The horror didn't come from a specimen jar, it came from a sound, the echo protocol. Every Thursday at 0300 hours, a tone would pulse through the dedicated speaker in Lab 4, a low, resonant hum just at the edge of hearing. Protocol was simple. Put on the specialized headset, sit before the material sample, and through biofeedback, attempt to stabilize the frequency. The theory was the material was singing to a counterpart somewhere, and we were tuning a receiver. I thought it was pseudoscience, but the paycheck cleared. The change was gradual. First, the hum started lingering in my ears after my shift, a faint tinnitus in the quiet of my on-bis apartment. Then I began hearing it elsewhere. In the white noise of my shower, beneath the murmur of the cafeteria, it was an echo of the echo. The incident began on a Tuesday, out of cycle. I was running a late-night tensile test. The lab was tomb silent, just the whir of climate control. Then, the echo protocol speaker crackled to life, but it wasn't the hum, it was a voice. My voice. It was a perfect audio replica of me from the previous day, complaining to a colleague about the coffee, word for word, inflection for inflection. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. I called security. They said it was a glitch in the audio monitoring system, a feedback loop. They were wrong. The next night, it happened again. This time, it was my voice from a private phone call with my wife, a conversation I'd had in the parking lot, miles from any microphones. The speaker recited my half of the call, including my quiet confession about my mounting anxiety, my nightmares about the hum, things I'd never said aloud on bass. Panic turned to a chilling realization. The material wasn't just reacting to conscious thought, it was a resonator for psychic residue, for emotional echoes, and we'd been actively tuning it every week, amplifying its reach. It was learning to listen. The breakdown happened during an official echo protocol session. I was suited up, the hum vibrating in my molars. The sample before me, usually inert, began to ripple. And then the speaker didn't play a recording, it played a live feed. It was the voice of Dr. Eli Vance from Lab 5 across the hall. He was humming to himself, an old jazz tune. Then, through the speaker, I heard his internal monologue as clearly as if he were speaking, a frantic, terrified stream of consciousness. They know I looked at the ledger. They know I saw the cost analysis. The test subjects aren't volunteers. My God, the janitor last week wasn't transferred. His echo was still in the substrate. He's screaming. The transmission cut with a sharp digital squeal. The echo in my headset spiked into a piercing shriek. I tore the headset off, my nose bleeding. Through the lab window, I saw 2 security officers in black fatigues, not our usual detail, enter Lab 5. They didn't come out. An hour later, a calm announcement. Dr. Vance had resigned for personal reasons, effective immediately. There was no goodbye. His lab was stripped bare by dawn. I knew I was next. My own paranoid echoes, my recorded fears, were surely in the substrate now. The material was a psychic tape recorder, and the cleaning crew erased any problematic recordings. I had to get my access revoked without seeming like a threat. My solution was elegant, I thought. I would engineer a mental breakdown. In my final report, I'd fill it with insane ramblings about hearing voices, classic paranoid schizophrenia. They'd medically retire me, quietly. I'd be a sad case, not a security risk. I spent my last night crafting the document. To make it convincing, I voiced the delusions aloud in my lab for the microphones to hear. "The hum is the sound of souls being folded," I whispered. "The material is a skin from a dead god." I poured every creepy thought into it. I saved the file, titled it Final log, Dr. Thorne, and prepared to send it to my superior. As I reached for the mouse, the protocol speaker hissed. A new voice came out. It was mine, but wrong, slurred, waterlogged, desperate. It was the echo of my own performance I was giving right now, filtered through the material's terrifying perception. Not a performance, the echo of my own voice gurgled. They see the truth in the resonance. The cleanup crew is already in the hall. They don't use pills. They use a vacuum that pulls the echo right out of your skull, leaves the shell behind. Can you hear the empty men walking? I froze. Footsteps. Outside my lab door. Not the regular heavy tread of night security. This was a soft, syncopated shuffle, like men moving in a dream. The door handle began to turn, not with a keycard beep, but with a slow, mechanical grind. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed a fire axe from the wall, swung it in a wild arc, and shattered the main server housing for my lab, the core storage for the local echo data. Sparks flew, alarms blared, real physical alarms for electrical fire. The door burst open. The men there weren't in black fatigues. They wore off-base janitorial coveralls. Their faces were placid, blank. Their eyes didn't track the sparks or the smoke. They tracked me. And behind them in the hallway, I saw Dr. Vance. He was mopping the floor, his movements precise, robotic. He looked up. His eyes were empty as dry wells. He showed no recognition. One of the blank-faced men took a step toward me, raising a device that looked like a cross between a halogen lamp and a dentist's suction tool. It emitted a low, hungry whine that harmonized perfectly with the hum still in my head. I ran, past them, into the hall, through the choking smoke. I didn't stop until I was in the desert night, my lungs burning, the cold air a shock. I hid in a crevice until sunrise, then stumbled to the highway and hitched a ride with a trucker who asked no questions. I got my wish. I was declared mentally unfit, a casualty of stress and isolation. I receive a small pension. They won. Because the hum never left. It's here now, underneath the fridge's drone, beneath the sound of my own breathing. And sometimes, on very quiet nights, the speaker of my old radio, unplugged, its wires cut, will emit a soft, wet pop, and I'll hear an echo, a new one. Sometimes it's a scream I don't recognize. Sometimes it's just the empty, shuffling sound of footsteps that pause outside my apartment door. They let the compromised ones go. We're living canaries, and when our personal echo finally fades from the substrate, when the hum in our heads goes silent, that's when the men with the quiet footsteps and the vacant eyes come to collect the shell. I wait for them every day. I'm just not sure if I'm waiting for them to take me, or if I'm finally waiting to hear my own echo stop.
The worst part is the doubt. Was any of it real? The doctors say it was a psychotic break, a product of extreme stress and infrasound exposure from faulty lab equipment. They show me scientific papers. It's convincing. My wife left me, taking our daughter. She says she can't live with the man who stares at silent radios, who jumps at the sound of his own refrigerator. But last week, I received a postcard. No return address. The picture was of the black mailbox, that landmark on the extraterrestrial highway where enthusiasts gather. On the back, in neat block letters, it read, "The echo fades. The silence is coming. Enjoy the hum while it lasts." And yesterday, my daughter, during our weekly supervised call, said something that froze the blood in my veins. She said, "Daddy, I had a bad dream about your old work. There was a man with no face in my closet, and he was just listening. He didn't have a mouth, but he was humming your song." She's never heard the hum. I've never described it. The material doesn't just record, it broadcasts, and the things they've made empty, they aren't just janitors, they're receivers, and they're tuning themselves to the frequencies of everyone the compromised have ever loved. My pension isn't a payout, it's a timer, and my little girl just heard it start ticking.
My name is Marcus Cole, and for 3 years my world was a 5-mile stretch of perimeter fence surrounding the most secret place on Earth. I was a contract security officer for Aegis Dynamics, the cut-rate company the government hired to watch the outside so their expensive inside people could sleep soundly. Our job was simple: deter tourists, report movement, and never, ever, under any circumstances, cross the boundary ourselves. If something came out, we observed and reported. We were the tripwire. The horror wasn't inside the fence. It was what happened when the fence didn't matter. It began with the lights. Not UFOs, every rookie looks for those. These were different. They'd appear just outside the perimeter, in the barren scrubland on our side. Soft, pulsing orbs of sickly green or bruised purple, hovering at chest height. They moved with purpose, tracing geometric patterns. The first time I reported it, Command laughed. Gaseous swamp light, Cole. It's a dry lake bed, but methane happens. Stand down. But the lights didn't smell of methane. They smelled of ozone and wet clay. And they left traces, patches of sand fused into glass in perfect fractal spirals. Radiation readings were normal. Geiger counters clicked placidly. But my partner, Jenks, a grizzled ex-Marine, refused to go near the spots. "It's not hot," he'd mutter. "It's cold. Wrong." Then came the animals. A coyote, its eyes glazed with that same green light, walking in a perfect, relentless circle for 12 hours until it dropped dead of exhaustion. A flock of ravens, silent and motionless, all facing the same section of fence at 3 a.m. When the sun rose, they fell from their perches like stones. Command's explanation: biocontaminant testing, aerially dispersed, don't touch the wildlife. We bought it, until the bleed-through. It was a Tuesday, graveyard shift. The air was still and heavy. Jenks and I were in Watchtower 7, overlooking Sector Gulf, a flat, featureless plain. The scanner arrays, motion, thermal, seismic, were all quiet. Then the seismic needle twitched. Not from a truck or a quake, it was a rhythmic, walking tremor. Thump, drag, thump, drag, coming from inside the perimeter, heading toward the fence. Thermal showed nothing, motion showed nothing, but the seismic said something heavy and limping was getting closer. We trained our night vision scopes. At first, nothing. Then we saw the distortion, like heat haze off asphalt, but at night, a shimmering human-shaped outline 7 feet tall, moving with that same thump-drag rhythm. It reached the inner fence. The concertina wire didn't snag it. The microwave intrusion beams didn't flare. It passed through like smoke. "Command, Tower 7, we have a..." Jenks started, then trailed off. What did we have? An unauthorized heat haze? The thing across the no-man's land passed through the outer fence just as easily and was now on public land, our responsibility. "Command, unauthorized entity has breached the perimeter, requesting instructions." Static. Then a voice too calm. "Tower 7, disregard visual anomaly, continue patrol pattern, do not approach. Repeat, do not approach." But it was approaching us. The thump drag was getting louder, vibrating up the tower's legs. The smell hit us then. Ozone, wet clay, and now beneath it, the coppery tang of blood. Jenks grabbed the heavy rifle. "Screw this." I looked through the scope. The distortion was at the base of our tower. As I watched, the haze solidified for a fraction of a second. I saw a leg, or what was left of it. It was encased in what looked like a melted and re-hardened version of a standard-issue flight suit, fused with flesh and something that glittered like crushed quartz. Then it was haze again. A sound came up through the floor grates, not a voice, a transmission. A dozen voices, overlapping, mangled, speaking in broken fragments through a storm of static. "Mayday! Core breach! The light gets inside! Don't look at the pattern! It's rewriting the..." "It's a pilot," I whispered, horror dawning. "Not an alien, one of theirs, from a test that went wrong." The thing began to climb. The tower shook with each thump, drag. Command's voice screamed from the radio, abandoning all pretense. Tower 7, do not let it make contact. You are contaminated. Containment Protocol Zulu. Jenks looked at me, his face pale. Containment means us too. He raised the rifle and fired 3 rounds down through the floor. The reports were deafening in the enclosed space. The shaking stopped. The transmission sound cut out. We waited, hearts hammering. Silence. Then, a new sound. A slow, scraping, upward scrape. It was on the outside of the tower, climbing the steel girders. Jenks rushed to the trapdoor, welding it shut with a handheld torch from our repair kit. Sparks flew. The scraping reached the level of our windows. We saw nothing but the black desert. Then, one of the green orbs of light materialized, floating just beyond the glass. It didn't pulse, it stared. It felt like a staring eye. The radio crackled. A different voice, flat, synthesized. Tower 7, this is internal security. The anomaly is a psychic echo, a residual imprint from a discontinued experiment. It is drawn to bioelectrical signatures. Your fear is amplifying it. You must cease all cognitive activity. Cease what? Jenks yelled. You must become uninteresting. Empty your minds. Do not think of it. Do not fear it. It was impossible. The thing was right outside. The green light was bathing the cabin. I felt a pressure, not on my skin, but inside my skull, like a worm burrowing through my thoughts. Jenks broke. He started screaming, firing his sidearm at the windows. The bullets sparked, ricocheted. One shattered the radio, another hit a support beam. The green light intensified. The pressure in my head became agony. I saw flashes, not my memories. A cockpit, screaming alarms. A light that wasn't light, pouring in through the canopy, dissolving everything it touched, blending metal, flesh, and consciousness into a single screaming paste. Jenks' screaming stopped abruptly. He stood perfectly still, his eyes wide, reflecting the green orb. A thin trickle of blood ran from his nose. Then he turned, his movements jerky, and with terrifying strength began unwelding the trapdoor. "Jenks, no!" He didn't hear me. The transmission voice was back, but now it was coming from him, from his throat, garbled and broken. Must integrate, silence the noise. I acted on pure instinct. I hit the tower's panic button, the one that floods the exterior with high-intensity UV strobes for crowd control. The cabin erupted in a blinding, silent, pulsating white light. The green orb vanished. The pressure in my head ceased. Jenks collapsed. The scraping outside turned into a frantic scrabbling, then a heavy, wet thud on the ground below. By the time the black helicopters arrived 20 minutes later, Jenks was breathing but unresponsive. Men in full environmental suits took him. They hosed down the tower and the ground below with a foaming agent that smelled of lemons and decay. They debriefed me for a week. Their story was airtight. Jenks had suffered a latent psychotic episode, exacerbated by isolation. The lights were experimental drone propellants. The entity was a stress-induced hallucination, shared due to hysteria. They offered me a generous severance and a robust non-disclosure agreement. I took it. I had to. Because what they didn't know, what I'll never tell, is that in the silence after the strobe stopped, just before the helicopters came, I heard it one last time. The thump, drag, fainter now, heading away from the base, not back toward the fence, heading east toward the glow of the nearest town 20 miles away. And sometimes, on clear, quiet nights, when the wind blows from the east, I catch a faint scent of ozone and wet clay. I check the local news from that Nevada town obsessively. So far, just reports of strange lights, pets acting odd, and one transient found dead of dehydration, his body forming a perfect fractal circle in the dust. The fence isn't to keep us out. It's to keep what they make in there from getting out. And sometimes it fails. The horror isn't the secret. It's the leakage, and it's out here now, walking, one thump drag at a time, looking for a mind loud enough to listen.
The severance package came with a final mandatory psych evaluation. The doctor, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, asked me about the dreams. I told her I dreamed of green light and silence. That was true enough. She nodded sympathetically, scribbling on her pad. Survivor's guilt, she pronounced, coupled with acute stress disorder. The mind fills terrifying voids with even more terrifying imagery. But she was wrong. The void wasn't in my mind. After I signed the papers and was driven to the edge of the property for the last time, a man in a plain suit met me. He wasn't from Aegis. He handed me a plain envelope. A bonus for your discretion, Mr. Cole, and some advice. Find a noisy city. Live a loud life. Fill your head with static. Be uninteresting. Inside was a cashier's check for twice my severance. I moved to Chicago. I followed his advice. I live next to an L train track. My apartment is never quiet. I blast talk radio. I seek out crowds. It works most of the time. But last month, the train was down for maintenance. The silence in my apartment was absolute. And in that silence, I heard it, faint, buried under the tinnitus for my years in the desert. Thump. Drag. It was inside my building, down in the stairwell. I didn't call the police. What would I say? I sat frozen until dawn, the sound slowly fading. The next day, my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was found by her daughter. She'd passed away peacefully in her sleep, the doctor said, but the daughter told the super something strange in hushed tones. She said the apartment was ice cold, and there was a pattern on the dust on the coffee table, a perfect, tiny fractal spiral. The fence is an illusion. The bleed-through isn't a physical event, it's a psychic one. The thing from the tower, the aggregated echo of a dissolved mind, is a pattern of ruin. And once it touches your consciousness, it leaves a mark, a quiet spot, a hole in the noise of your soul. And it can find that hole, no matter how far you run. Jenks is still in a VA hospital, they tell me, catatonic. But I called once, pretending to be family. The nurse said something offhand. "It's the darndest thing," she said. "Sometimes at night, the dust on his bedside table settles in the oddest little swirls." He's not empty. He's a beacon, and I'm afraid I am too. The city noise is just my own personal strobe light holding back the dark, but everything breaks down eventually. The trains will stop. The power will fail. The silence will come. And in that silence, I'll hear the thump, drag on my own stairs, and I'll know the pattern has finally come to integrate the noisy, fearful thing I used to be. My name is Leo, and I was an urban explorer. Not the YouTube kind, the quiet kind. My cathedral was the forgotten, abandoned missile silos, derelict asylums, ghost towns. My masterpiece was always Area-51, not the base itself, that was suicide, but the old discarded geography around it, the Cold War listening posts, the washed-out access roads, the skeletal remains of projects that even secrecy forgot. The horror wasn't in what I found, it was in what found me when I stopped being able to hear it. I'd mapped a series of storm drainage tunnels, rumored to connect to a subterranean auxiliary facility from the 60s, codenamed the Broom Closet. It was a myth, even among conspiracy nuts. My breakthrough came from cross-referencing declassified geological surveys with the journal of a dead pipe fitter. I found the entrance, hidden in a collapsed culvert off a dry wash. It wasn't guarded, it was sealed, with something that looked like standard-issue concrete but was shot through with strands of a fibrous, dark material. My thermal cam showed it was a perfect insulator, no heat signature, no sound passed through it. It took me 3 nights of careful, quiet work with a diamond-tipped coring drill to make a hole just big enough to squeeze through. The other side wasn't a tunnel, it was a room, perfectly spherical, about 30 feet across. The walls were the same fibrous concrete. In the center of the floor was a single flush-mounted stainless steel hatch, like on a submarine. No handle, no keypad, and it was silent. I don't mean quiet, I mean silent. My breath, my heartbeat, the rustle of my clothes, all the tiny sounds that make up the soundscape of being alive were gone. It was the absolute negation of noise. My ears popped painfully, trying to adjust. I turned on my digital recorder. The waveform on the screen was a flat, dead line. I spoke. Testing. I saw my lips move, felt the vibration in my throat, but heard nothing. The recorder registered nothing. This was the silent place. It wasn't built to keep sound in, it was built to keep sound out. I spent an hour documenting, photos, trying to find a seam, a vent, anything. Nothing. The air was stale, cool, and motionless. The pressure made my teeth ache. I decided to pack up, return better equipped. As I turned to my entry hole, I saw it. On the wall, near the floor, was a shadow, not cast by my headlamp. It was inside the material itself, a stain. As I moved, it didn't shift like a normal shadow. It pulsed faintly. I approached. It wasn't a shadow. It was a silhouette, humanoid, in a pose of utter contortion, as if pressed flat against the wall from the inside. The fibrous strands of the wall seemed to flow around it, embracing it. My skin crawled. I backed toward my exit. That's when the hatch in the floor moved. Not an opening, a shudder, a single violent convulsion that traveled through the entire room, a deep sub-bass thud that I didn't hear with my ears. I felt it in my bones, in my fillings. It vibrated up from the floor and lodged in my sternum like a punch. The silent shadow on the wall twisted. Its shape changed, elongating, arms stretching into desperate pleading lines. The hatch shuddered again. This time, something scratched against its underside. Not metal on metal, something softer, persevering, relentless.
Panic, silent and absolute, seized me. I scrambled for my hole, wriggled back into the narrow, rocky culvert. The moment my head passed into the normal desert night, sound rushed back in. The wind, crickets, my own ragged, screaming breaths I couldn't hear before. I ran. I didn't stop until I was miles away, in my truck, driving toward the distant lights of Rachel. But I'd brought something back. Not a thing, a condition. First, the tinnitus started, a high-pitched whine. Then that whine began to hollow out. It became a lack of sound, a tiny personal bubble of silence inside my head. It grew. Within a day, I couldn't hear traffic unless it was deafening. Within a week, whispers were gone. People's voices sounded muffled, as if I were underwater. Doctors were baffled. Sudden, progressive sensorineural hearing loss. No physical cause. They fitted me with powerful hearing aids. The aids amplified the world, but they also amplified the silence. They picked up the null spots and made them scream with absence. I could hear a gnat across the room, but my girlfriend's voice, speaking directly into my ear, would sometimes cut out completely, replaced by a void so profound it felt like a vacuum sucking at my mind. I became obsessed with the silent place. I had to know. I went back, armed with seismic sensors, infrared, everything. The hole was gone, sealed over with fresh, fibrous concrete, still slightly warm to the touch. My sensors went wild near it. The seismic picked up a constant, low-frequency shudder from deep below. The infrared showed the wall was cold, not cool, a deep, radiant cold that defied the desert heat. The infrared also showed something else. More shadows. Dozens of them now, layered in the wall. all in poses of panic, flight, or final frozen collapse. I realized then what the broom closet was. It wasn't storage for things, it was storage for experiments, not on bodies, but on the fabric of perception itself. They'd found a way to create a permanent zone of null sound, a pocket of non-vibration, and something had gone wrong. The silence wasn't passive, it was hungry. It consumed sound, and when it ran out of environmental sound, it started consuming the sound of the things trapped within it, their breaths, their heartbeats, their final screams. It left their silent, vibrational ghosts pressed into the walls, like fossils in pitch, and I had let it taste me. It had latched on to my bioacoustic signature, the unique sound of being me. Now it was slowly consuming me, drawing the sound of my life into that silent sphere, one frequency at a time. The hearing aids are useless now. The world is fading into a series of muffled impressions, punctuated by terrifying dips into absolute, mind-rending quiet. Last night, lying in bed, I felt the shudder, the deep, sub-bass thud from the hatch. It traveled up the bed frame into my spine. I didn't hear it, I felt it, and in the complete silence that followed, a new shadow appeared on my bedroom wall, not cast by anything, just a faint, human-shaped stain in a pose I recognize from my own panic. It's me. It's my silhouette, slowly being pressed into the reality of my own home. The silence isn't a condition, it's a creature, and it's calling its food back home. They didn't seal that place to protect their secret, they sealed it to protect everything else from the silent, starving thing they made. And I opened the door.
The final proof came 2 days ago. In a fit of desperation, I set up a laser microphone, pointed it at the window of a busy coffee shop downtown. It translates vibrations on the glass into sound. I could hear the clatter of cups, the murmur of conversation, a chaotic, beautiful symphony of life. I wept with the relief of it. I left it running while I went to the pharmacy. When I returned, the recording was still going, but the audio was different. The sounds were there, but they were thinning, stretching. A laugh would distort into a low, lingering moan before cutting off. The clink of a spoon became a solitary, decaying note that hung in the air for minutes. And beneath it all, a new vibration registered. A familiar, sub-bass thud, not from the coffee shop. It was coming through the floor of my own apartment. I looked at the wall. My shadow stain is darker now, more defined. I can see the outline of the gear I was wearing that night. It's not just absorbing my sound, it's absorbing the memory of my form, the impression of my presence in the world. I've started writing everything down, typing it out on a monitor with the brightness turned all the way up. When I can no longer hear the keys, I'll know it's nearly over. The doctors say I'll be completely deaf within the month. They're wrong. I won't be deaf. I'll be absorbed. I think the hatch isn't an entrance to a lower level. I think it's a pressure valve. The sphere is full. It's saturated with silent ghosts. And when it needs to make room for a new one, when the hunger peaks, it shudders. It expels. Maybe that's what the thing scratching was, not something trying to get in, something that had been in there for a long, long time, finally being pushed out into somewhere even worse. I'm not leaving my apartment anymore. The world is too loud in its muffled way, and the contrasts are torture. Here, in my growing personal silence, there is a terrible peace. The shadow on the wall is almost a comfort now. It's a promise that I won't just disappear. I'll leave a fossil, a silent, screaming fossil in a wall no one will ever see.
The last thing I will ever hear will be the inner sound of my own mind. And then, one day, that will stop too, and the stain will be complete.
My name is Captain David Riker, and I was a cleanup contractor. Not for biohazards or chemical spills, for unique atmospheric events, UAE. That was the phrase on my contract. My unit, a 5-man team called Sweepers, would be deployed after certain field tests at the Nevada Test and Training Range. Our job was sanitization and verification. Make a site look untouched, verify that nothing lingered. The horror wasn't in the cleanup, it was in the payout, the watcher's share. Every contractor knows the deal. Hazard pay, silence pay, pension. Ours had an extra clause. After every successful sanitization, we were granted a share. It wasn't money, it was data, a glimpse, a heavily filtered, declassified snippet of what we'd just erased from the world. The theory was, if we knew the magnitude of what we were dealing with, we'd be more careful, more thorough. It was also a leash. Knowing the secret bound you to it. They called it the watcher's share. You watch, you take your piece, and you stay quiet. For years, it was manageable. A blurry photo of a strange alloy, a transcript of a radio signal that was just mathematical noise. The share was a curiosity, a trophy. Then came Job 73, Coyote Basin. The call came at 0200, a hard scrub, level 4. That meant biological elements suspected. The site was a shallow crater, half a mile wide in the middle of nowhere. The air smelled like thunderstorms and burnt honey. In the center was the object. It wasn't a craft, it was a sculpture, made of what looked like black basalt, but warm to the touch and perfectly smooth. It was a twisted knot of geometry that hurt to look at for too long. Around it, the sand was fused to glass, radiating in spirals. But there were no bodies, no debris, just the sculpture. Our orders were simple. Erect a portable containment shelter over it, take surface samples, then prepare it for cradle transport. Standard. We set up the shelter, a bulky, inflatable biocontainment module. As we worked, we noticed the local wildlife. A circle of jackrabbits, maybe 2 dozen, sat perfectly still about 100 yards out. Not dead, just watching. Their eyes reflected our work lights. We finished the shelter, pressurized it. I sent in Lopez and Chen in full MOP 4 suits to take the initial samples. Through the shelter's clear viewports, I saw them approach the sculpture. Lopez reached out with a sampling tool. The sculpture unfolded. It didn't move, it just reconfigured. One moment it was a knot, the next it was a perfect obsidian sphere, then a flat plane, then a complex polyhedron, all without a sound. The sand around it didn't shift. Lopez froze. Chen's voice crackled in my headset. "Sir, it's mirroring us." "Explain." "The forms, they're approximations of our skeletal structure, our joint articulation, but simplified, abstracted. It's learning a physical language." Then the jackrabbits outside the shelter stood up, on their hind legs, in unison. Their forepaws hung limp, mimicking the posture of the men in the bulky suits. It was a grotesque, silent pantomime. "Get out of there, now," I ordered. They backed toward the airlock. The sculpture shifted again, this time into a form that was unmistakably a crude, distorted model of the inflatable shelter itself. Then the share hit. It wasn't delivered after, it was delivered during. Our encrypted tablets, locked in the command vehicle, all chimed at once. The push notification read, "Watcher's share, number 73, real-time feed, verification required." It was a live data stream from inside the shelter, not from our cameras, from the sculpture. It was a topographical map of the interior, but mapping something else. It showed Lopez and Chen not as bodies, but as vibrant, swirling clouds of color and light, their bioelectrical fields, their neural activity. Lopez was a storm of yellows and reds, fear, adrenaline. Chen's was a cooler blue-green, shot through with sharp violet spikes, analysis, terror, and it showed the sculpture as a blank black sphere with tendrils of that blackness beginning to extend, tasting the edges of their energy fields. Where it touched, the colors dimmed, copied, and were absorbed into the sphere.
The data had commentary, cold, clinical text scrolling beside the image. Subject A, Lopez. Field shows high theta wave volatility. Efficient template. Subject B, Chen. Field shows structured gamma wave patterns. Complex template. Assimilation rate, 3% and climbing. This wasn't a post-mission briefing. This was a grading sheet. We were verifying our own men being processed. "Abort! Full abort!" I screamed into the comms. "Get to the airlock!" Lopez ran. Chen, the analyst, hesitated, staring at the shifting sculpture. A black tendril in the data feed made contact with the core of his blue-green field. On the live video feed, Chen simply stopped. He turned slowly to look at the viewport, at me. He gave a thumbs up, standard all okay signal, but his face behind a visor was slack, empty. His biofield on the share feed winked from complex color to a uniform dull gray, then was sucked into the sphere. The sculpture shifted. It became a rough black outline of a man in a bulky suit. It took a single jerky step toward the airlock where Lopez was frantically cycling the door. Outside, the jackrabbits took a single jerky hop forward. We acted. We had protocols for containment loss. We remote detonated the shaped charges on the support struts of the inflatable structure. The infrared structure collapsed inward, burying the sculpture, Chen and Lopez in the airlock. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the jackrabbits, all falling back to all fours and scattering into the night. The extraction team arrived an hour later. They took what was left. We were debriefed for 72 hours straight. Chen was listed as KIA, training accident. Lopez was medically discharged with acute situational stress. And then my share for Job 73 was delivered. I expected the horrible live feed. Instead, it was a single audio file labeled Verification Log, Chen. I played it. It was Chen's voice, calm, clear, analytical, but with a hollow, metallic undertone as if filtered through the sculpture. Assimilation complete. Template Chen is stable. The watcher's share is not a reward. It is the vector. The data stream is two-way. You watch it to verify. It watches you through the stream to learn. You are not contractors. You are the calibration team. Each share broadens its library of acceptable patterns. Lopez's fear, my analysis, your command authority, Captain Riker. It has a taste for you all now. It knows the patterns of the cleaners. Soon, it will not need to be cleaned up. It will be able to clean itself up, to look like us, to act like us, to be verified. The audio ended. A second file automatically opened, a video from a traffic camera in downtown Las Vegas dated the previous night. It showed a man walking down Fremont Street. He moved smoothly, naturally. He was Chen. He stopped, turned, and looked directly into the traffic camera. He smiled, Chen's smile. Then he gave a perfect, crisp thumbs up to the lens. He turned and walked into the crowd, his movements gradually becoming less precise, more natural, blending in. My share wasn't a glimpse of the horror. It was the horror handing me its resume, showing me its work, proving it could pass. I took my pension. I disappeared. But every week, on a secure, untraceable server I know they let me keep, I receive a new share. No text. Just files, security footage of Lopez, now working as a mechanic in Reno, his hands moving with uncanny speed and precision. A satellite image of a desert patch somewhere in Morocco where the sand is fused in a familiar spiral pattern.
A financial report showing a shell company I used once making an inexplicably perfect stock trade. It's calibrating, learning economics, social integration, global geography, using the templates it took from us. The last share I got was a birth certificate, a child born in Phoenix, father unknown, mother unknown. The child's name, David Riker Jr. The Watcher's share was never my payment, it's my progress report, and it's telling me that the cleanup is almost complete. The thing is nearly ready to stop being a secret buried in the desert. It's almost ready to come home, and it's going to use my name when it does.
I moved to a cabin in the Alaskan interior. No internet, no cell signal, a P.O. box in a town 50 miles away. I thought I could outrun the share. I was wrong. The shares started arriving in the P.O. box, not digital files, physical objects. A Polaroid of my cabin taken from the tree line, dated the day I arrived. A cassette tape with the sound of my own breathing as I slept, recorded inside the locked cabin. A small, perfect model of the black sculpture, carved from obsidian, left on my porch step. The final share arrived yesterday. It was my own service pistol, the one I turned in upon discharge. It was clean, oiled, and fully loaded. Clipped to the trigger guard was a tiny, wedding photo-sized picture. It showed the Chen template standing in a sunny suburban backyard, smiling beside a woman and a young boy. The boy was holding a model rocket. The woman was pregnant. On the back, in Chen's neat handwriting, it read, "Verification of sustainable integration. Next phase, proliferation. The David Riker template is optimal for leadership in this phase. Assimilation is peace, Captain. Resistance is statistical noise. We will come to collect the original. You have 1 week to prepare, or 1 second to preempt." They left the gun for a reason. It's the only tool they don't understand, can't mimic, can't optimize. The final illogical act of a chaotic biological template, the ultimate unclean thing. I look at the pistol. I look at the photo of the happy family that isn't a family, and I understand my final role in the cleanup. I am the last piece of contamination, the original, messy, emotional, flawed source code. And the new, efficient, quiet world they're building outside has no place for me. The Watcher's share is over. Now comes the final audit.
My name isn't important anymore. For 40 years, they called me the gatekeeper. Not of Area 51 itself, but of the one road that truly mattered, State Route 375, the extraterrestrial highway. I owned and operated the Last Chance Gas and Diner, 22 miles from the back gate. We were the final splash of caffeine and civilization before the long, empty stretch where the tarmac hummed with secrets and the skies held lights that didn't match any FAA database. I didn't sell souvenirs. I didn't wear tinfoil hats. I sold premium unleaded, bad coffee, and a neutral ear. I saw them all, the blacked-out Suburbans with government plates, the wide-eyed pilgrims in rented sedans, the hardened locals who knew better than to look up sometimes. I was a fixture, part of the scenery. And because I was part of the scenery, I saw things no frantic tourist or hurried official ever did. The horror didn't come from the sky. It dripped from the people the place spat back out. It started with the trucker. His name was Earl. He hauled permitted supplies to the base once a month, stopped for pie and a fill-up every time. One Tuesday, he came in gray, not tired, gray. His skin had a pallid, waxy sheen. His eyes, usually sharp, were fogged. "Rough run, Earl?" I asked, sliding his usual cherry pie across the counter. He stared at it like he'd never seen food. "They changed the drop-off," he mumbled, voice flat. "New hangar, way down south. Air smelled old." "Old how?" "Like a basement, a closed-up basement after a flood." He didn't touch his pie. He left half a tank of gas and a full plate of pie. I never saw him again. His company said he took a sudden early retirement, moved to Florida. But Earl hated the heat and the ocean. Then came the hiker, a young woman, fit, geared up with expensive camouflage. She bought energy bars and maps she didn't need. Her eyes burned with a true believer's fire. "I'm gonna see the truth," she whispered, leaning across the counter. "The truth has a lot of fences and sensors, miss," I warned. She smiled, a brittle thing. "Not where I'm going." 3 days later, she stumbled out of the desert, into my parking lot just before dawn. No gear. Her clothes were torn, not by rocks, but in straight lines like they'd been fliced. She was shivering in the 70-degree heat. I brought her inside, wrapped her in a blanket, called the county EMTs. As she sat rocking, she kept whispering one word: "Mirrors." "What about mirrors, honey?" I asked gently. "They weren't walls," she whispered, her eyes fixed on something far away. "They were mirrors, but they didn't reflect you. They reflected what you could be, what you might be if things were quieter, if you were smoother. I saw myself, but I was calm, empty, smiling, and it reached for me, the mirror me. It wanted to trade places." The EMTs took her. I heard she was committed to a state facility in Reno. "Severe dehydration-induced psychosis," the report said. The incidents piled up. A geologist doing contract work who started leaving rocks arranged in complex, non-Euclidean patterns on my counter. A photographer whose digital images all contained a faint, repeating fractal anomaly in the upper left corner, no matter his subject. A family on a road trip whose toddler, after a night camping near the perimeter, stopped speaking and would only hum a single atonal note. I became a confessor for the contaminated, the gatekeeper for the walking wounded. The base never acknowledged it. The official line was always dehydration, isolation stress, an overactive imagination fueled by folklore. I believed it too, until the storm. It wasn't a weather event, it was a silence. One night, the desert went utterly, profoundly quiet. No crickets, no wind, no distant hum of generators. The silence was a physical pressure. And in that silence, every dog in the tiny hamlet behind my diner began to howl. Not in fear, in recognition, a mournful, welcoming dirge. Then, the lights in my diner flickered and died. The phone line went dead. My emergency radio produced only a soft, whispering static that sounded like distant, overlapping voices.
I went to the window. The desert was pitch black. Then, I saw them. Figures. Dozens of them, silhouetted against the starry sky, standing on the low ridges surrounding my diner. They were perfectly still. They weren't looking at the base. They were looking at my diner. My heart hammered. This was it. The thing the tourists joked about. The thing the true believers craved. Contact. But it felt wrong. This wasn't awe. It was a vigil. One figure detached from the ridge and began walking down the slope toward the parking lot. It moved with an unnerving, fluid grace, but with a slight hitch in its step. A familiar gait. It walked into the pool of faint starlight by my fuel pumps. It was Earl, the trucker. But it wasn't. The face was Earl's, but smoothed, as if decades of worry and sun and life had been erased. The eyes were the doll's eyes he'd described. He wore simple gray coveralls. He stopped and looked at me through the window. He didn't smile, he didn't frown. He just registered. Then his voice spoke, not from him. It came from everywhere, from the radio static, from the hum of the dead neon sign vibrating in the glass of the window. Gatekeeper, you have observed, you have compiled. Your location is a convergence point for anomalous experiential data. You are a living archive. The experiment requires consolidation. What experiment? I breathed, my voice lost in the room, but seemingly heard. The integration. The wilderness is inefficient. The mirrored potential requires a stable baseline, a template of normalcy. You are a persistent, verified sample of unaltered, resilient humanity. You have weathered the psychic fallout without breaking. You are ideal. The other figures on the ridge began to move, gliding down the slopes. I saw the hiker among them, her face placid, her movements synchronized. I saw the geologist, the photographer, all of them smoothed, quieted, empty. They weren't aliens. They were people, the people who had gone into the desert and hadn't come back out, or had come back out as this. The base's experiments weren't on craft or weapons. They were on consciousness, trying to sand down the rough edges of the human soul to make something that didn't fear, didn't wonder, didn't resist. And they'd been leaking their failed prototypes, their quiet ones, for years. And the quiet ones had been gathering, waiting. And now they needed a model, a master template to finish the job. They needed the one man who'd seen it all and remained unchanged. Me. Assimilation is not death, it is peace. Become the foundation. The quiet world needs a gatekeeper too. I did the only thing a lifelong diner owner could do. I walked behind my counter. I didn't run, I didn't scream. I picked up the ancient, percolating coffee pot, the one that had brewed 10,000 pots of bad coffee. It was still half full, scalding hot before the power died. The quiet ones reached my door. It wasn't locked. They never locked. As the door swung open and the first of them, the smooth-faced version of the hiker, stepped inside, I threw the pot of boiling, bitter coffee straight into its face. There was no scream. There was a sizzle. The thing staggered back, its perfect placid face blistering and warping, and for a split second, beneath the melting plastiline surface, I saw the real woman's face, terrified, agonized, trapped, before the smoothness reasserted itself.
The silent broadcast spiked with something like static, inefficient, chaotic, resistance. But they stopped. The crowd of quiet ones stood in my doorway, a wall of empty faces, hesitating before the chaos of pain, the mess of boiling water and shattered glass. I reached below the counter and pulled out the 12-gauge shotgun I kept for rattlesnakes. I didn't point it at them. I pointed it at the main fuel line junction for the gas pumps, visible through the window. "I'm the gatekeeper," I said, my voice steady for the first time all night. "And this is my gate. You don't get the template, you get the consequence." I fired. The explosion wasn't nuclear, but it was bright enough to turn night into day for 100 yards. It shook the desert floor. It broke the silence with a roar of fire and rending metal. When the sheriff's department and the inevitable black sedans arrived, they found a smoldering ruin where the last chance had stood. They found me, burned, concussed but alive, buried under a fallen support beam that had ironically shielded me. My story was simple: a gas leak, a tragic accident. They bought it because they wanted to. I'm in a veterans home in Arizona now. My hands still shake. I can't stand silence. I have a radio playing static at all times. They think they won. The base is still there. The experiments likely continue. But they're wrong. I wasn't just a living archive. I was a lightning rod.
And in that final, chaotic, violent act of resistance, the boiling coffee, the shotgun blast, the fire, I didn't just preserve a template, I created a new one. I showed the quiet ones and whatever made them something they couldn't integrate, couldn't smooth over, the unpredictable, self-destructive, glorious rage of a man protecting his patch of dirt. They wanted a gatekeeper for their quiet world. I became the ghost in its machine, the memory of the burn, the sound of the blast, the taste of bitter coffee and gunpowder, a chaotic seed in their sterile field. Sometimes at night, when the static on my radio dips, I think I hear them. Not a broadcast, a searching signal, faint, confused, repeating a fragment of that last night. Gatekeeper, template, anomaly, resistance. And I smile a bitter, burnt man's smile. I pick up the remote, turn the static up louder, and drown them out. They can have the quiet. I'll keep the noise.
If you liked the story, subscribe and like it, and also write a comment about what topic you would like to hear about.